And to wrap up our program this evening, I would like to invite Glenn Adamson, who is the Artistic Director of Design Doha, to introduce his spotlight conversation tonight, which is entitled The Future of Design is Now.
Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for sticking with us throughout the afternoon and evening. My name is Glenn Adamson. I'm the Artistic Director of Design Doha. And way over there on the other end of the stage is the great Yوريس Lárman, who comes to us from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I hope you've all seen his Doha Dragon, the newest work that's come from his studio, Yوريس Lárman Lab. And if you haven't, certainly go and take a look at it after we speak this evening, but we'll also be getting to it at the end of the presentation. So Yوريس, hello, welcome to Doha.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So what we're going to do here is go very quickly, just in half an hour, through Yórés's body of work, and also talk about some of the larger themes that emanate from his body of work. The title that we chose, The Future of Design is Now, is somewhat of a nod to a saying that's often attributed to the science fiction writer William Gibson, which is, quote, "The future is here, it's just not very well distributed." In other words, it coalesces or concentrates itself in certain places and at certain times, and I would suggest that Yórés's lab is one of those places. So we're going to touch on many of the bodies of work that he's created, but the idea here is really to think about the concept of futurity and progress in design at large, using Yórés's work as a theme, or as a focal point, you could say, or case study. So Yórés, first of all, why are we starting with a Google search box?
So the first images that you saw was the entrance of our solo exhibition that traveled to, there are several cities in the States, and it had a timeline. And this timeline is very important for me. So we're in the lab very interested in the past, history, and in the future. And we're trying to create this bridge between both worlds, and we do that through physical objects, basically, like that tell a narrative. So I like to say I'm a part from the last generation that still knows how the world operated before we got all hooked up to the internet 24 hours a day. And this was really transformative for my life and career. So Google first launched their first website in 1998. And this was exactly the year that I started studying at the Design Academy in Eindhoven. So this was very important for the rest of what I did. You know, I was a country boy, had no contact with bigger world out there. And all of a sudden I could literally contact an MIT professor to collaborate with. Before, it was totally impossible. And for kids that were born in the 90s and the 2000s, it's very hard to understand what an enormous difference that is. So I've always been interested in science and technology, and it got me in contact with this guy. It's the next picture. It's a German professor called Klaus Matek. He studied the growth of bones in trees very thoroughly. People from his research lab were the first to create algorithms, computer algorithms that could mimic the growth of bones. And bones have a way to optimize themselves really efficiently, especially the bones of birds. You can see that in the next. So on the left side, you have a bird's bone. From the inside, you see all these hollow spaces and these constructions. This is a very ingenious way of nature to grow its constructions. On the right side, you see the people from his research lab at the car manufacturer Opel, who used that sort of wisdom from evolution, you could say, to generate the most optimal part of a car engine. And if you click it, I think it will run the animation. So you see literally modern industrial time transforming into this futuristic era of organic forms that are hyper efficient. We use these algorithms to create furniture with, also as a functional exercise, but also to see what evolution would actually do. It's literally evolution at work. So we applied sort of virtual forces to seat and backrest, and then the algorithm would optimize itself for a perfect shape in this case.
So here we arrive, Yoris, at maybe one of the first themes to explore in relation to the work, which is the question of optimization itself. Because in some ways, this could be seen as a perfect chair or a chair that's derived from logical, algorithmic procedure. So it holds up the weight of the person in this kind of ideal way, mathematically ideal, which is a very interesting way of thinking about optimization. And of course, we know that optimization has this long trajectory going back into modern design history, which often has excluded as much as it's included, if you see what I mean. It's been a repressive force and an exclusionary force as much as it's been a generative force. And I wonder what you think about the concept of optimizing form and optimizing design through a procedure like this algorithmic design process.
I'm always a bit. I really liked this series of work because we could do it for the first time. We could experiment with these algorithms which were brand new, and it's just exciting to see what comes out. On the other hand, an optimized object also has something boring, if you know what I mean. If you've done it the first time, I mean, every time you create something new that is highly optimal, what then? Yeah. So it's an exercise that is, I think, really interesting the first time that you see what comes out, and then after, I think something optimized should have a functional need or so.
Yeah. Like a circle is optimal, but once you've seen a perfect circle, it's not a very interesting form, or a perfect square. And it seems like often what you're doing is optimizing on the basis of a certain procedure, exploring it, going quite deep, and then you suddenly move into some completely different pathway of research.
Yeah, we like the experiment. That's what we're good at. That's what I'm interested in. I like to basically surf the waves of progress in a way, to discover new form, to discover new ways of making things, new materials.
This is actually a good slide to talk about materials, because we talked about the algorithm which drives the form, but obviously the materials are different here.
Yeah.
And that means you need to come up with new solutions for realizing the form once you have it.
Yeah, well, every material has its own properties. The chaise longue in the back, for instance, is a rubber material. It had different properties, so the algorithm would react differently to its properties. So in that sense, we try to create a series of work that is all slightly different, but uses the same algorithm to generate its form.
So speaking of materials and making, the next project or series of projects really that we'll look at is the maker furniture, which is about a certain kind of distributionary thinking about making, perhaps less exclusively under your own control. So perhaps you could introduce this body of work. Yeah,
this is based on the what back then they called the 3D printing revolution. Everything back then. Everybody was very excited about this new technology called 3D printing, which was existing for many years before. But at this moment of time, there were these cheap printers coming to the market that were that everybody believed would change the future. We never really understood it. We have a kind of a love and hate relationship with 3D printing. So we try to use these affordable 3D printers to actually make a functional piece of furniture with. And the idea here was that people could distribute their blueprints all over the world, and local manufacturers could make these pieces of furniture in your local neighborhood. And we worked together with a company called 3D Hubs. They were friends. They had more facilities than McDonald's. They always used to brag about. You could basically order the chair and have it made around in your neighborhood, and then you could collect it. A lot of people downloaded the blueprint for free, so we got in all these nice, pictures and feedback from people that actually made the furniture. And in our studio, we also, because these furniture pieces were chopped up into small parts, they become like three-dimensional puzzles. So you can use relatively small machines to create highly organic forms. In this case, these maker chairs that are made in solid wood and are CNC milled on our computer-controlled CNC machine and then assembled by hand.
Right.
So something we really believe in also in the lab is that the combination between handcraft and digital tools that allow us to create new form that have a form of complexity that is otherwise impossible to create.
And there's a kind of politics here, Yoris, in the sense that, as I alluded to earlier, this idea that the future is concentrated in certain places, and then in other places you might have lag or a kind of backwardsness. That's a very modernist way of thinking about progress. But because this distribution system that you're using through these various maker spaces and the use of the 3D printer as an immediate transmission point of the form, you're able to immediately distribute the form far beyond the confines of your own laboratory, in fact, globally, to whoever's interested in participating. Yeah. So it's a kind of progress that you can opt into, you could say.
Yeah, and I mean, there's many people actually changing the forms and the materials and stuff, and creates a little evolution of it on its own.
Like adapting your design to their own
The only
taste.
rule we had was that people could download things for free, but they were not allowed to sell it commercially. Right. So,
Yeah. We can also see, of course, the incredible complexity that this bit-by-bit way of thinking about form yielded for you. So it's almost like a three-dimensional version of what you can do with screen-based graphics, because you can build anything you want out of these smaller pieces by algorithmically relating them together, right?
It almost becomes architecture in a way, because it's like little Lego blocks that it can be infinitely complex. So it allows an enormous form freedom that is, just amazing to work with.
Okay, so here we start getting into the topic that will eventually lead us to the Dragon Bench, which is MX3D, and this is an amazing, amazing passage within your career. So maybe take us back to the start of this invention and what it's done for you.
You're literally looking at the start. So we had a lot of experience already with 3D printing and robots and using plastics, but the materials always were a bit of a bad quality. We could never make something really big. So at a certain moment, we started to combine a welding machine together with this robotic arm, which was like a second-hand robotic arm from the car manufacturing industry. If you click it, it's a video. Here you see our first experiments of 3D printing with metals. So basically, you see a welding machine weld metal on top of its former weld. And here you see that it allows us an enormous form freedom. So we could basically draw in mid-air, double curves. You could even print horizontally from a wall, and it was something that was never done before. So we found this new, sort of new land of opportunity. Yeah. I mean, if you could do something like this, you can basically make anything. And this technology we use first of all for expressive organic furniture pieces, first dragon benches that we made together with the gallery, Friedman Benda. And here you see different typologies of printing. So one is dots on top of each other, and the other is a continuous line that also allows the printing of double curved tubes. Complexity is kind of endless. And we got better and better in working with the technology. And at a certain moment, we just saw it had so much potential. We set up a company around the technology called MX3D. And as a poster project for this new tool, we started to work on the 3D printing of a bridge. Here you see that we can also work in different types of metals, which have different settings and things. So this is a bronze work that was, maybe you can click further, here you see what it ended up with. Yeah. So it's a bronze screen. They're all exercises of how far we can take the technology. The bronze is now used to create really big utilitarian objects for the energy sector and stuff. And this was the first animation that we made for the bridge concept. We were in San Francisco, we were at Autodesk, and we started brainstorming what would be the most iconic project to do with the technology, and we thought, hey, we're in Amsterdam, let's think about doing a bridge. And because the material is so strong, the robots could actually print their own support, and they would slowly crawl over to print the next section of the bridge. So our first idea was to print it in situ over the water, which was a bit too dangerous for the city. Location is very touristy, so that was just impossible. And here you see a couple of images of the process. Eventually the bridge was done, I don't remember actually the time, I think it was 2018.
Yeah, before COVID, certainly, 18 or 19.
And the second image, you see it installed at the canal in Amsterdam.
Yeah, I'm always amazed by these images. Maybe I'll just go back to this one because it almost looks like you are looking at a science fiction special effect that's been brought to life, and you can't quite believe you're looking at a real thing. And that leads me to a question, which again I think is very interesting in a more general sense outside your own practice, which is about what, to use a theoretical term, what sometimes people call technological determinacy. In other words, the tool determines the form. Mm-hmm. So if you have a chisel, it's going to make a certain kind of form, a certain kind of shape, and that's how you get traditional carved wood furniture, let's say. Mm-hmm. And the same thing is true for ceramics, the same thing is true for a loom. And there's a way in which your work often, and I think MX3D is maybe the best example of this, you're inventing the tool, and then you're seeing what it does naturally or organically, what evolves in a way out of that tool's logic, and then you arrive at these completely new, quite science fiction, futuristic objects. And I wonder what you think about the idea that the tool is telling you what the form should be, as opposed to you choosing the form.
Yeah, in this case, it goes further than that. It's not just the tool and the technology, it's also just the law, because I had very little say in what the bridge could look like, strangely enough.
Really?
Because we had to deal with all kinds of safety measures, and in Amsterdam we have the red light district, where you have people like women with high heels that are supposed to be able to walk over the bridge, but also policemen with horses that should not slip. The little locks that lovers put on bridges and stuff that were not allowed. Kids that could put their head between openings larger than 10 centimeters, etc., etc. There were so many forms of, law that were applied to the bridge. And then you have the tool itself. So we did not know, it doesn't have an industrial standardization, so we didn't know what the bridge could bear in terms of weight. So we worked together with Arab on algorithms that could sort of guess what would be the optimal structure for the bridge and the thickness of the material. Like right now, we're able to measure exactly how good a certain weld line is. We can predict how metal would warp because of the heat, etc. It's like we got it under control. But back then, it was one big experiment.
But it's almost also like you're like writing this extremely complicated equation where there are all these different variables, including legal restrictions, almost as if you were designing an airplane cabin and there's so many rules that the chair just ends up looking a certain way because there are so many regulations. And it's like this is the outcome of the equation that you've written, and the art is in writing the equation properly, perhaps.
Yeah. But I tried to make it as expressive as what was possible within the options that we have.
Yeah. I mean, that's super interesting, too, the relationship between technology and expression, because we're sort of making it sound like the technology is in the driving seat and you're inventing the technology, and then the form is evolving from it. But obviously, your work is also hyper-expressive and might remind people of Art Nouveau, rather, or, as you said, drawing in space in this very free way. And often you're trying to invent techniques that will give you a kind of freedom that traditional joinery or other building processes don't have. So okay, so maybe you could take us to your new home. Which is
so our studio just moved to this area, which is very nicely set in nature in between the woods, and it was pretty transformative too for us. We came from these industrial studios that just had a really different feel. So 25 other creative people who started a community that works and lives sort of together in a very creative area just in the outskirts of Amsterdam. And yeah, the nature part's becoming more and more important in the work. I believe in this new era that we have to evolve in, called the Symbiocene. So moving from the Holocene to the Anthropocene to the Symbiocene, where technology, nature, and culture really merge together. So one is not better than the other. People are not above nature, but are part of it. And this is becoming more and more important in the work that we are studying at the moment.
Yeah. So, sorry, let's slow down on those terms for 1 second. The Holocene being the past geological era of the Earth, the Anthropocene being the moment when humans start to fundamentally change the nature of the Earth itself through pollution and other mechanisms, and the Symbiocene being almost a utopian idea in some ways. I don't know if you accept that word, but the idea of a kind of synthesis between human and natural forces in some kind of balance, sustainable balance.
Yeah, of course you can call something like that utopian. I would say it's the only way forward.
Right.
To be able to survive the next 100 years, I would say.
Yeah. Well, this is a fascinating way of understanding the predicament that we're in, that utopia is the only option left to us.
I guess so.
Yeah. So let's, I think this is the last thing before we get to the dragon, if I'm not mistaken. So this is a very recent body of work that, in a way, is a beautiful illustration of the concept of the Symbiocene. So what are we looking at here, Yoris?
Yeah, we're experimenting a lot with how to integrate nature in outdoor works that we do. This was a moss printer, a green printer, that would irrigate walls that allow moss to grow in graphic patterns. We worked together with a Dutch startup that created mosscrete, which is a biophilic material that has some nutrients that moss likes and other forms of nature do not like. So this is specifically made for moss to grow on. We're currently working on benches called symbio benches. Oh yeah, this was the concept that never happened, unfortunately.
That's the museum I used to direct, by the way, and we never did manage to do that.
But we seriously worked on it.
Yeah.
The problem with that museum is that it has tiles on the outside, which makes it impossible for something to grow on. But here you see a couple of very interesting examples just from nature, of how nature always finds its way and creates, in this case, a nice symbiosis between man-made and nature-grown objects. I'm very, very much interested in working with mosses and lichens, also for the time scale factor in it. So in these symbio benches, we had the idea for what if we could make a work of design, but it would only be finished in like 50 or 100 years. Yeah, so the time factor is also important, I guess. I think fashion is one of the problems with modern world. We throw away so many things because we don't think it's fashionable anymore. And I'd like to start working on things that we want to keep for a very long period of time.
So here we're seeing the development of a set of these symbio benches that were eventually displayed at Chatsworth. This is an exhibition we worked on together. So this is interesting because you got a traditional stone carver involved in making them as well.
Yeah. We worked with a traditional stone carver and an augmented reality tool. It was the first experiment with augmented reality, but I can talk about that later as well. Yeah. In my opinion, these are the perfect examples of what we mean by working on the Symbiocene. These are historic, it's a historic site, a very interesting garden with a specific lawn that has been mown for 300 years. So the vegetation on the lawn would only grow so high that the lawnmower would not cut it off. So it actually evolutionarily adapted itself to its function. And then we used the vegetation from the lawn to grow in these benches in patterns called Turing patterns. So the Turing pattern is an algorithm that was developed by Alan Turing in the 50s. It's one of the first algorithms that really mimics the chaotic structure of nature. So you find it in nature a lot, but it's very much also a computer language. And so it's the ideal symbiosis between computer language this culture, nature, and technology.
It's very much past and present too. And in fact, the stone that you quarried for the bench is the same as the stone of the house. So you have this incredible conversation going across centuries. And the idea that furniture would also be a habitat for life and that it would have a very long life ahead where it changes and changes.
Yeah.
It sort of inspires me to talk about this idea of, or ask you about this idea of progress. You said earlier that that you were surfing the waves of progress, and David Chipperfield and Ibrahim Al-Jada, Tim from the Design Museum, Tim Marlowe from the Design Museum were talking earlier about progress having been a kind of primary conviction of design that was never questioned in past decades, and now it almost feels the other way around, like progress feels like the problem that we're trying to, or the sort of fever dream that we're waking up from because of all the damage that it's caused environmentally. But you still seem to be quite attracted to the idea of progress as a designer. I just wanted to ask you about the concept of progress itself before we get to the Dragon Bench.
Yeah, I think if you do not agree with progress, you just have a poor definition of what progress is. Progress is not polluting the environment necessarily. Progress, if you look at progress from the Symbiocene standpoint, it is a very beautiful way forward, I must say. The only way forward.
Yeah. So it's a matter of defining your goals, perhaps.
Yeah.
Redefining your goals.
And I think I've been talking about regenerative design also here in Qatar and in Doha, because people actually have the ambition to create a regenerative economy. And I always wonder if people actually understand what that means. So, because it is very, very different from what is going on now.
Yeah.
And I like to create, at least for the projects that we are thinking on right now, I like to create, to just visualize what it actually means to work with, fully biodegradable materials.
Yeah.
How far can you take that? Or materials that are inert but are very long-lasting. I've been thinking about that a lot, like working with sand and working with, well, in this case, steel and metal. Yeah, this already starts talking about, we can start talking about the Dragon Bench. So
sure.
I like to, in this case, at MX3D, we work a lot on these utilities, like rudders for ships, and in this case, heat exchangers. These are 3D printed heat exchangers, and I see a lot of beauty in them. It's usually I can be stunned looking at the just functional form of something industrially with an industrial purpose. And at the same time, I like to work with local materials. I think that's also a good way forward. And with digital fabrication, it's very suitable to work with local materials. So in this case, we worked for the first time with sand, a large format 3D printing of sand, and our stainless steel that we are used to work with. So it's a combination between the language of these industrial purpose sort of. I like to compare it to the machine art thing from the 30s.
Yeah.
Like just looking at a functional object and see the beauty out of it. So in the Dragon Bench, you see in an organic way that these lamellas, they morph into the sand dunes of the bench. And sand is also a nice material to work with here because of the climate and the heat, and it's just much nicer to the touch. Here you see the robots at work using multi-axis. So it's hard to explain, but making these things is extremely complex because it has not one straight line. So everything is rotating. But informed by algorithms, you can just make it work.
I feel like a really great thing to do with the Dragon Bench is just to go outside and try to draw it. And then you realize just how complicated it is because every single line in it, as you say, is a compound or complex curve. So it's a mind-bending, space-bending kind of an object.
Assembling it was a real challenge.
Yeah.
So because it had no reference, we created this hologram that in a very high precision shows where the parts needed to be. So without the hologram, it would never been possible to make the object. And this is also super nice for the future of making, I would say. So the last, 15 years, we've been sitting behind these computer screens, tapping and clicking with robots and printers, pressing buttons. But right now, we can work with these holograms in mixed reality and actually work with your body again. So I can design with my body in 3D, large scale, together with a team, and we can also create the object by hand. So it's an ideal combination of handwork and being informed by digital information.
Yeah. So here we have the finished object, and I had the honor of being present when it was unveiled, craned into place in pieces and then unveiled. And it is an amazing thing, the literally dragon in flight coming down onto the streets of Doha. And I guess maybe I'll just ask your thoughts about having the piece here, and maybe a little bit about your reflections on what you've seen on your visit here, the Design Doha Festival, and then the design here in Doha in the Arab region. What is your response to this context in which your piece has landed?
Well, in this case, I tried to respond anyway to a local situation. So we tried to work with local sand and have it adapt a bit to its situation. In general, I feel there's a lot of energy here and a lot of excitement about what is possible. You see it hanging everywhere on the street signs, like endless opportunities, I guess, which is true. At the same time, I feel it's still very much in the beginning, so which is an exciting moment of time. But as a person who likes to look at the history and the future, I don't know. I just have to. I would really look forward to see what's going to happen in the next 10 years and what is the quality of the stuff that's going to be made. In the upcoming time.
Well, indeed, the whole point of bringing an object like this here is not just to serve the public in this very interesting way, but also to inspire the designers that are here. And of course, you've brought so much in terms of your work and your ideas, so it's a real pleasure and honor to have you here. And indeed, we are at the beginning, not of Arab design, obviously, which goes back centuries and centuries, but we are at the beginning, at least, of one thing, which is Design Doha. So it's obviously a great honor for me to be involved in this first edition and to look ahead to further editions to come. So maybe we'll all be able to come back here on our 10th anniversary, the 5th biennial, and we'll gather around the bench and talk about what's happened in the decade in between. So Yoris, thank you very much. Thanks very much for coming.